Hi, welcome everyone to the Earth Summit podcast. Today, our first guest will be Dr. Jessy Rivest, who is the Vice President and Head of Cleantech at Xerox, which is bringing to market a portfolio of PARC innovations to make our customers' work lives easier and to mitigate significant greenhouse gas emissions. So Dr. Rivest, it's wonderful to have you here and lovely. We're excited to hear from you. And so just to get right into it, could you share with us a little bit more about your background and kind of where your interest in materials science and engineering came from?
Yeah, sure, Emmy. I guess my earliest memory of being really excited about technology is when my mom and I decided to take apart the microwave. It was just so fun to see all the electronic components inside of it and realize that that complex set of stuff made a microwave work. And fast forwarding a few years, when I first arrived at MIT, I learned that you could get class credit for building a robot, which seemed like the coolest thing you could possibly do. And so to be able to get class credit for it was a huge win. And I didn't know why everyone wasn't a mechanical engineer so that they could participate in this robot competition. I went on to get all my degrees in mechanical engineering. And between my master's, my PhD, and my postdoc, my background is really in materials science and mechanical engineering at the intersection of those two. And I've studied nanoparticle solar cells and surface chemistry of batteries, all before getting to PARC. And I came to PARC about 7.5 years ago as a research scientist and quickly transitioned to being the head of the Cleantech portfolio. And now I'm in a role of looking at how to commercialize that clean tech.
Nice, that's great. So before PARC, you had been at Berkeley, and can you tell us a little bit more about what you had been focused on there in terms of your research?
Yeah, my research at Berkeley was centered around nanoparticle solar cells and trying to improve the efficiency of solar cells by using nanoparticles, which can be single crystals, very perfect single crystals, but can be manufactured much more cheaply than the large scale single crystals that are made using silicon today.
Gotcha. And so moving on to the next question, in terms of your role as director of the Energy Materials and Systems Research Group at PARC, can you share a bit more about your previous research in that role, as well as ongoing research and how that division has been moving forward in materials and systems engineering for clean energy?
Yeah, sure. We've worked on a large handful of really cool projects. The first one that I worked on when I got here was indirect ocean carbon capture, which is kind of a mouthful, but it turns out that the ocean takes up about 25% of our CO2 emissions every year. And it's the reason that we have ocean acidification, because when the CO2 gets taken up by the ocean, it turns into carbonic acid and slightly acidifies the ocean. And that causes ecological problems, but it also causes problems with how much more CO2 the ocean can take up. And so we can look at the ocean as a giant capture machine. And if you could only suck the CO2 out of the ocean would be able to capture more. So it's a way of reducing our total CO2 concentration in the atmosphere through use of the ocean. So that was a really interesting technology that we had some fun partners on. And ultimately, we put that on the shelf because it came out to, in the most optimistic scenario, $400 a ton for that captured CO2. And that's still a high number today. But there will probably come a day when we want to take that back off the shelf and re-examine how we can drive down those costs. Or unfortunately, there may come a day where $400 per ton of CO2 seems like a pretty good deal. So that was one project. Another project we've been working on more recently is around methane pyrolysis. So the way that we get hydrogen today, which is a $120 billion market today, is using methane or natural gas. And the molecule is CH4, that's methane. And so there's C, which is the carbon, and H, which is the hydrogen. And the current process oxidizes that carbon. So the output is that you have CO2 and you have hydrogen. And so that is sort of inherently a dirty way to get hydrogen. But if you could take that CH4 molecule and not oxidize the carbon, that could provide you with very green hydrogen. and at, we think, a much, much cheaper cost than what electrolysis is capable of doing today. And so that's been an interesting area of research where we're looking at molten metals and using these vats of molten metal to crack the methane and do pyrolysis on the methane to give us green hydrogen. And through these projects and others like them, we've kind of seen this pattern of what looks like it could be really a viable technology in the real world. And we've been working hard to figure out the right formula for transitioning something from research, it might be a few academic publications and a seed of an idea, to commercial viability. And the tool that really bridges that gap is a really detailed techno-economic analysis. So when it's in academia, people want to maximize the efficiency or optimize whatever the figure of merit is. And when it's only in industry, you're just looking at driving down the cost curves or driving up the margin. Whereas as you're making that transition, it's really important to be able to understand both sides of that and have a fully integrated techno and economic model.
That makes sense. Do you find yourself working on that kind of on a daily basis where you're focused both, or you're looking at both the research end and the kind of go-to-market end?
Yeah, that's a really important part of it.
Awesome. So I also understand that you are working on air conditioning. So why are you working on air conditioning? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. We're spending a lot of effort here working on air conditioning, partly because as the planet warms, we're going to need more of it, unfortunately. And in some cases, it's for productivity and comfort. And in the developed world, we're all just, we might need to add another rooftop unit to make sure our building stays comfortable as the temperature goes up. But in the developing world, it's a much bigger deal. And McKinsey just came out with a report about a year and a half ago on extreme heat and humidity. This is something that is going to be costing lives. When it's extremely hot and extremely humid, people's bodies can't cope. So we also need air conditioning for those types of reasons. Not only that, but air conditioning is such a huge energy consumer and has so many refrigerant emissions, which are greenhouse gases too, associated with it, that it represents 4% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than all air travel combined. So the whole aviation industry emits less than the air conditioning industry. And so there are regulations coming up to start to tighten what the efficiencies can be, tighten which types of refrigerants are allowed to be used. And there are also a lot of ESG commitments being made by large and small companies around reducing their carbon footprint. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to pull on the biggest lever, biggest single energy consumer in your building or electricity consumer in your building, which is your air conditioner.
Gotcha. So when did you first start working on air conditioning? I guess when did that become a priority for you?
I would say about 3 years ago, we recognized the importance of it, and we were looking at our portfolio, trying to understand what are the technical assets we have that we could bring to bear on this problem. And we found one that looked like it could hit really hard on it, and started digging and figuring out how we could play in this space.
I see. And at Xerox, do you find yourself kind of tapping into each of these different projects, or are you mostly focused on one area, like within methane or looking at air conditioning? Do you get to kind of see it all as vice president?
In my current role, I get to hear about what's going on in the research program, which is really exciting. And many of those projects I used to be involved in, I'm seeing new projects bubble up that are really interesting, impactful technologies, and the researchers are really getting creative and making big impact in the research world. So I get a report on those, but my primary focus right now is on air conditioning and figuring out how to make that bridge from research to product.
Got it. Thank you. That's amazing. So how can we have impact on this problem, whether it's individuals or in the research area? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that we've really been looking hard at is where the air conditioning energy use goes. And so it's easy to look at changing the temperature. That's what we all think about when we think of air conditioning. It's making the temperature lower. But actually, on average, half of the energy from your air conditioner is going to dehumidify. So you've all seen probably a dripping air conditioner, right? You've seen an air conditioner that has like some moisture condensing and it's dripping. It's not that it's broken and it's not that it's designed to drip, but it's just the laws of physics. When you cool down air, it can't hold as much moisture. The same reason you have dew on the grass in the morning. And this dripping is an indication that you're doing something that's really energy intensive, which is a phase change. You're changing it from water vapor to liquid water, and it's inherently energetically expensive. And so if we could separately treat the temperature change and the humidity change, and treat those each with the technology that best applies to them, we could optimize the efficiency of both and save quite a bit of energy. But that requires changes to the products that are offered today and changes to the way that the market approaches the operation of air conditioners. So it's a lot of paradigm shifts that will be needed to drive us toward a cleaner, more climate stable future of air conditioning.
What do you think the process looks like for enacting those changes? Does it start with, obviously research plays a large role in that, but I guess what can consumers, individuals do to play a role in making that difference as well?
Yeah. Well, the place to start is where the air conditioning pain points are the highest. So if you have a high air conditioning bill, you should start looking into technologies that enable you to separately treat the temperature and the humidity. As individuals in our own homes, there's less that can be done other than recognizing that you may not actually need to cool down the air in your house. You may just want to buy a dehumidifier because it makes you a lot more comfortable at a greater range of temperatures.
I see. That makes sense. So kind of more generally, how do you feel that we can accelerate developments in clean tech and clean energy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. As we're watching the West Coast burn and the East Coast and the Southeast flood, we definitely need to accelerate the development of these technologies. And number one is just to make sure we're working on the right problems, and that the technologies that we're working on bringing to market have a potential for really, really huge impact at scale. And once we're sure that we're working on one of the right problems, and there's no one right problem, there's a really large family of them. This is not a silver bullet situation, but it's going to require hundreds of new technologies, but each one can have a pretty significant impact. So once we're sure that we're working on one of the right problems, figuring out how can we make that technology profitable, which is going to take some vision from companies to realize that the future is going in this particular direction and they want to invest in the future, not only for climate reasons, but for business purposes, to enable the folks that are making really deep ESG commitments to reduce their greenhouse gases in a profitable way. And then the government has a really strong role in this, right? The government is determining what are the efficiency standards of our air conditioners, for example, or what are the standards of our electric grid and how green it is. And so those regulations need to have a plan for tightening, have a plan to be funded. And the developed nations need to help give access to capital to the developing nations to make sure that they are coming along in this journey too, because they need help doing this. This is an expensive thing to do. And it's the developed nations that have gotten us there, and the developed nations that are going to hurt just as badly if we globally don't meet our goals. And Climate Week, the UN Climate Week is coming up at the end of September. This is going to be a great venue for people to continue talking about this public-private partnerships and global cooperation for solving this really important problem.
Gotcha. That's great insight to hear. And could I ask, what are your thoughts on how these developed nations, as you were mentioning, like how do we get them to kind of act upon their words and really make a difference?
Yeah. I think in the last 2 years, we've seen some really nice trends of voluntary action.
Mm-hmm.
We've really struggled for decades to get international agreement and commitment on having very aggressive goals. Even the goals that are in place today from COP are not sufficiently aggressive. But what's heartening is that the mindset has shifted from, we all have to agree, get everybody in the room. Why isn't everyone in the room? Why isn't everyone agreeing? To, okay, whatever. It's going to be hard to do it internationally, but I'm going to do it in my state, or I'm going to do it in my city. Or the European Union has done a fantastic job with their Green Deal of starting to craft legislation that affects a really large portion of the market. And so that's on the public side. In the private side, companies have started to make some really deep commitments. And, Google and Apple have always made nice commitments, and it hasn't really spawned an act of everyone else following suit. But in the last 2 years, we've seen it become the norm to be promising carbon neutrality by 2050 and then by 2040. And companies keep backing up that date and making their commitments more aggressive. And one of the ways in which those commitments have become more aggressive that's really exciting is that they're starting to talk about Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 3 emissions is the products that they buy. So all of their supply chains are now committed to this. What it means is that you don't have to be a publicly traded company to be required to start to decarbonize your footprint. And that trend gives me a lot of hope that even if we can't all get in a room and make one single agreement, the world is shifting such that everyone's just kind of making it happen on their own.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's certainly encouraging to see. So thank you so much, Dr. Rivest, for all of your insight. And it's been wonderful learning more about your research. Curious, could I ask what motto or quote or book do you most frequently revert back to, and why does it resonate with you?
Oh man, let me think about that for a minute. My dad always talked about luck, and you don't get lucky, you make your luck. And I think we're in a situation right now where we're in a really bad situation of our own causing, and there aren't going to be any lucky strikes that we get. And we need to work really hard at this problem and get more people interested, more people involved, so that we can really push it forward. I guess it's not a publicly available source, but my dad always talks about luck, and I tend to agree with him in this case. We need to make some really, really good luck for ourselves in climate change.
Definitely agreed. I think a great source and a great comment for sure. And I think it definitely starts, at the local level, national, international, kind of feeds its way up. So I definitely think that's a great perspective to have. And also, as a final question, could I ask what last piece of advice or comment would you like to make to our audience today? And what are you looking forward to in your work? We'd love to learn more about that as well.
Mm-hmm. So advice to the audience would be, especially those who are new to climate tech and clean tech, and just getting on board because of the mega drought that we're having in California, or because of the crazy hurricanes that are now reaching much further north than they used to. If you're getting into climate tech because you're stressed about the problem, figure out a way to help calm yourself, because you can't be effective if you're upset about this all the time. But if you are dedicating your career to pushing this forward in the most impactful way you know how, then just do your piece and don't let the frenzy of what's going on around you distract you from the cause.
Definitely. And in terms of looking forward with your work at Xerox, what are you looking forward to?
Well, definitely looking forward to launching an air conditioner. That's number one, getting that product out the door, and starting to penetrate into the market to allow people to save a lot of energy on their air conditioning bill, and therefore reduce their greenhouse gas footprint. There are other research programs at PARC that we're looking to commercialize one by one. 2 of them I told you about earlier. There's a whole large portfolio of those, and it's exciting to see PARC as this incubator of really interesting and impactful research, and Xerox as the conduit and the source of not only capital, but also operational excellence that can help be the conduit for these ideas out into the real world. So looking forward to seeing what comes next after air conditioning.
Absolutely. That's wonderful to hear. Well, again, Dr. Rivest, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful hearing about your research experience, from tackling ocean acidification to hydrogen. I think definitely provides an optimistic outlook on the future of clean tech and sustainability. So any final comments that you would like to make?
No, thank you for having me, Emmy. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
You too. Thank you so much again.
Cheers.